This is New Zealand, genuinely one of the most beautiful countries on Earth. Jagged mountains shouldering the clouds, lakes that hold the sky like mirrors, coastlines that look like they were hand-edited for a tourism brochure. It's remote. It's calm, and it's home to a small, tight-knit population. That distance from the rest of the world is a big part of the charm. It's also the seed of a puzzle. Why are so many New Zealanders, especially young, highly skilled ones, choosing to leave? Start with what works. Daily life here ranks high on almost every metric that matters. People enjoy good education, a robust healthcare system, low corruption, stable government, and a culture that tilts egalitarian. If you were designing a livable society on a clean sheet of paper, you'd steal half your ideas from New Zealand. The paradox is that a place that's wonderful to live can still be a difficult place to build a varied, large-scale economy. When your entire population is closer to a big city's headcount than to a country's, there are limits on the breadth of opportunity that can exist at home. Layer in the geographic isolation, and those limits start to show up in career ladders, industry choices, and the gravitational pull of bigger neighbors. That pull, in this case, is Australia. It's close enough to feel familiar, large enough to offer diversity, and tied to New Zealand by a web of agreements that make crossing the Tasman unusually straightforward. In practice, New Zealanders can live, study, and work in Australia with minimal friction, and Australians can do much the same in New Zealand. Think of it as an open door between two houses. One house is smaller and quieter, the other is bigger, louder, and full of rooms that only make sense if you have millions more people. If you're a 20-something with a degree and ambition, you don't have to dislike the small house to want to try the big one for a while. To understand why this decision keeps repeating, zoom in on New Zealand's economic shape. The domestic market is tiny. That doesn't make growth impossible, it just means growth looks different. Industries that rely on scale, big finance hubs, high-volume manufacturing, specialized corporate headquarters, naturally sprout in places that sit on major shipping lanes or serve vast urban corridors. Almost anything that can be done at scale in New Zealand can be done at greater scale somewhere closer to the world's busiest routes. Even services that smaller advanced economies often export, like high-end banking or regional headquarters, tend to cluster in cities like Singapore or Sydney because logistics, currency recognition, and network effects all stack in their favor. So which industries thrive at the end of the world? The ones that must be there. Tourism, of course. Local services and local finance, naturally. Some maritime and niche operations, yes. But the standout is agriculture. New Zealand's farms are absurdly productive, helped by fertile land, abundant water, and a southern hemisphere growing season that complements the north. Sophisticated methods and serious mechanization mean these farms punch far above their weight. They also don't need an army of workers to run. A nation can be an agricultural champion and still offer limited on-ramps for urban graduates who want to work in tech, film post-production, biotech, advanced research, or any of the 1,000 little niches that bloom in bigger markets. If agriculture is a well-oiled engine, housing is the great national preoccupation. Selling houses, renting houses, building them, financing them, and regulating the whole lot consume an outsized share of economic activity. That concentration comes with a cost. When more and more energy funnels into bidding up land and property, homes drift out of reach for the very people a country most wants to keep. Young families, early career professionals, skilled workers, just getting started. Policy moves, bans on certain foreign buyers, tweaks to tax settings, public signaling to cool speculative fervor, have helped take some heat out of the market. But fundamentals remain. Demand is strong relative to supply. Building is expensive and slow, and property remains a cultural and financial anchor. Even after declines, affordability is still a hurdle, and if your domestic economy orbits housing, you end up tying your fortunes to a sector that doesn't create the same range of jobs as a diversified industrial base. Now, here's where the story gets counterintuitive. If high housing costs were the only problem, you'd expect people to flee to cheaper places. Many don't. They move to Australia, hardly known for bargain real estate in its biggest cities. That's the tell. The central driver isn't just price, it's opportunity density. In a large economy, there are simply more rungs on the career ladder and more ladders to climb. Niche roles exist because there are enough customers, enough institutions, and enough adjacent industries to sustain them. If you're a biomedical researcher, a film colorist, a product manager specializing in a sub-niche of fintech, or an aspiring curator for a museum wing that attracts 1 million visitors a year, the odds are better that your job lives in Melbourne, Sydney, or Brisbane than in a smaller, more distant market. Another factor, friction or the lack of it. Moving countries usually means paperwork, language barriers, and social reinvention. Moving from New Zealand to Australia for many means familiar language, broadly aligned culture, and rules that treat you almost like a local. University spots? There are more of them across the Tasman, and a student from New Zealand can be treated similarly to Australians in fees and access in many cases. Professional networks? You can plug in fast. Social acceptance? A New Zealander isn't likely to face the skepticism that often greets immigrants elsewhere. When the path of least resistance happens to lead to a bigger playground, people follow it. This leaves New Zealand with a balancing act. On paper, the population is still growing. In practice, a meaningful slice of its most mobile workers spend at least part of their careers abroad. To keep the machine running, the country attracts newcomers, often talented people from densely populated parts of Asia or elsewhere, who fill roles and enrich communities. And yet, some of those newcomers eventually make the same calculation. If the long-term ladder looks taller in Australia, why not climb it there? Over time, that pattern gives New Zealand an awkward reputation as a waypoint. Come here first, settle in, then, once you've got the paperwork, look across the water. So, why not slam the door? Tighten rules, restrict movement, try to trap talent in place? For one, it would be politically fraught. Many New Zealanders live in Australia. Many families are split across the sea. Voters generally like options that benefit them personally, and the freedom to move is a huge benefit. For another, the relationship cuts both ways. Australians do come to New Zealand, often older, often cashed up, often drawn by scenery and safety. They buy homes, they spend money, they bring a slower rhythm that suits retirement dreams. That inflow isn't a perfect remedy for a youth talent outflow, but it's part of a larger ecosystem that reflects deep goodwill between neighbors. And then there's a subtler truth. The door that lets people leave also lets them return, often with skills, savings, and perspective. Plenty do. They go abroad, gather experience, and come home to start businesses, lead teams, or simply invest back into the place they still call theirs. If the door stays open, and it likely will, then the challenge shifts from preventing exits to making returns and stay decisions more attractive. What does that look like in practical terms? Start with the same duo that comes up in every conversation: jobs and housing. But not just more jobs, more varied jobs, jobs that anchor teams and spin off suppliers, jobs that link into the world instead of waiting for the world to come to them. New Zealand already shines in certain niches that map to its strengths: premium agriculture and food tech, screen production with the right incentives and infrastructure, niche software firms that sell globally from a beautiful backyard, renewable energy and green tech, where natural resources and policy stability are assets, not footnotes. The trick is compounding these niches into clusters, so that a graduate doesn't just have one company to apply to, but a dozen, so that a mid-career specialist isn't choosing between a single role or a plane ticket. Tell a 23-year-old, this matters, and their real question is simpler. If I stay, will my life move forward? That's housing again, but it's also transit, childcare, the cost of groceries, the feel of a city after dark, the possibility of stumbling into unexpected work because there are enough meetups, labs, makerspaces, and small studios to trip over. Countries don't keep people by insisting they stay out of duty. They keep them by making it obvious, tangibly, weekly, in ways you can feel, that staying keeps your life on pace with your peers elsewhere. There's room to maneuver. New Zealand's public finances are comparatively prudent, which means there's capacity, when it's strategically wise, to invest in the kind of infrastructure that multiplies opportunity. Not vanity projects, but connective tissue, digital links, export pathways, research partnerships, regional specialization that doesn't try to clone Sydney, but instead doubles down on New Zealandness as a competitive edge. Safe, clean, predictable, beautiful. Those aren't soft virtues. They're magnets, especially for people with kids, people building companies that need calm to do complex work, and people who want to be sure that the institutions around them will still be sane 10 years from now. Of course, it's easier to sketch strategy than to live it. Housing supply takes time. Training takes time. Building a cluster is slower than announcing one. And there's the constant temptation to chase scale by imitating places with 10 times the population and a century of inertia behind their industries. That's a trap. New Zealand's advantage is precisely that it's small and trustworthy. In a world where chaos is an ambient hum, the promise that things here work and will keep working is a product people will pay for, whether they're sending their visual effects work, their clinical trials data, or their family. None of this negates the personal motivations that drive migration. Sometimes the decision is simply adventure. Sometimes it's love. Sometimes it's a degree program that isn't offered locally, or a promotion that only exists in a city with 20 Fortune 500 headquarters. That's life. The goal isn't zero departures, it's a high rate of boomerangs and a steady stream of new arrivals who decide that, yes, this is where they'll build their next decade. When people leave, the country shouldn't resent them. It should make it easy to stay connected, invest remotely, mentor from afar, and slide back in when the time feels right. There's also a narrative piece, which sounds fluffy until you watch how it shapes choices. Countries sell stories about Themselves, and New Zealand's story has long been unspoiled paradise at the edge of the map. Keep that. It's true. But add a second line. And a smart place to build globally. Tell the world that the quiet room at the end of the hallway is where complex work gets finished. Show founders they can hire globally and live sanely. Show researchers that small systems can be fast. Show graduates that there are more rungs than they think, and that some ladders end in places the rest of the world will envy. One more uncomfortable truth worth saying plainly. Brain drain hurts more when an economy is narrow. The broader the base, the more departures you can absorb without losing momentum. That suggests a long game. Make it simpler to start and scale firms that sell beyond the borders. Streamline the path from lab to market for universities and research institutes. Encourage high-skill immigration that complements local talent instead of displacing it. And wrap those arrivals in reasons to stay that aren't solely economic. The more people you have doing interesting work with each other, the more gravity you create. And yes, housing again. A country can't build itself out of every affordability crunch overnight, but predictability matters. Investors, builders, and families all make decisions on multi-year timelines. Clear, consistent policy that gently tilts the system toward supply, lowers friction in permitting, and rewards long-term stewardship over short-term flipping makes a difference. Every young family that can picture a home, not as a lottery ticket, but as a reachable plan, is one more family that plans their future where they are. If all of that sounds like a lot of effort to keep people in a place that many would say is already close to perfect, that's the paradox again. Beautiful places don't get a free pass from global economics. In fact, beauty can mask fragility. When everything looks fine on the surface, it's easy to miss that your best and brightest are quietly exporting their careers 2,000 kilometers west. Not because they're unhappy, but because the escalators are moving faster over there. The answer isn't to pretend the escalators will slow down. It's to build more of them here, shorter, nimbler, suited to a smaller building, and to make sure the ride is just as smooth. Will New Zealand solve this? It already is, in fits and starts. Some people leave and never come back. Others return with experience and capital. Some industries remain small. Others spike into global relevance for a season and then consolidate into stable pillars. Immigration reshapes communities. Communities reshape what newcomers want. Policy pushes here, eases there. And through it all, the mountains don't move. The lakes don't drain. The streets stay largely safe, and the schools keep teaching kids who, 10 years from now, will ask the same question their older siblings asked: do I stay or do I go? When they ask, the country should be ready with more than scenery. It should be ready with a pitch that's practical and personal. Stay, because the work you want exists here now. Stay, because the rent won't swallow your 20s. Stay, because the commute is short, the air is clean, and the team you're joining actually ships things the world uses. Or go for a while, because the door swings both ways, and we'll be here when you're ready to bring it all home. In the end, the story of why people leave New Zealand is the story of how opportunity sorts itself in a world that's both tightly networked and stubbornly geographic. The country sits far away, and that will never change. But distance isn't destiny. The same factors that make New Zealand a postcard, stability, safety, trust, also make it a surprisingly good place to do serious, globally connected work. If the next generation believes that, the migration graph won't flatline, but it will start to bend toward returns, toward roots, toward a different kind of success story. Not the myth of the scrappy nation that becomes the next Silicon Valley, but the reality of a small, confident country that decided to be indispensable in its own unmistakably Kiwi way. That's the answer to the paradox of paradise. People leave because it's easy and because big markets have gravity. They come back, many of them, because home has gravity too. The job now is to make that gravity a little stronger, a little smarter, and a lot more obvious. And if you're standing on a ridge at dusk somewhere on the South Island, looking at a sky you swear can't possibly be real, you realize why that's a bet worth making.